citywide surveillance equipment and data management policies to order at 12:04 p.m. Present are Alder Zellers, Alder Balde, and myself. Alder Carter, I guess, will be here, and Alder Skidmore says he's going to be a half an hour late. So I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye. No one opposed. There's no one from the public here to comment. Disclosures and recusals. Anyone? Nope. Okay, on to the meat of our agenda. We will be talking about three main things: finalization of the agency survey, review of policies from other cities, and then the element for Madison surveillance policy. We were going to have a presentation by IT about all of the surveillance technologies that exist, that they control, but that we'll be doing that at our next meeting, which is the 28th. Is that it?
That's right, and that'll be in this room.
And that'll be in this room. Okay. So Heather has drafted a letter, a cover letter, and a survey, and I believe has run it by Marcy. Is that right? And that you might have some feedback for us, Marcy?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see if Heather accepted. No, I know, but I didn't know if you accepted. Like, one of my things was this isn't even mentioned. I don't know if you want me to just go through all my comments that I had. Okay, because I didn't know what was out for people to review, if they had the draft that you gave me. Okay, okay, thank you, sorry.
So have you guys had a chance to read? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so let's just hear from, unless you have any words, Heather, to say about it?
Nope, happy to hear comments.
Okay, all right, Marcy?
Are you starting with the letter or the survey? Which?
Marcy Paulson from the City Attorney's Office.
Okay. Hi.
Sorry.
Sorry. Did you want to start with the letter or the survey?
Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
I have no idea, with the definitions that are provided in there for surveillance technology and stuff. I assume you went out and looked at those, because I didn't look to see. I mean, surveillance is defined all over the place in all different ways, so I didn't touch on that. The only comment I had about the letter was on the second to last paragraph. It talks about if there are any questions that the agency can't answer thoroughly for any reason, they should note it in the final question of the survey, and I didn't see that as the final question of the survey, so that was the only thing I had from the letter.
So should we comment if we've got things on the letter?
On the letter, yeah, let's start.
Okay. So I've got a couple of things that are just really minor in the first paragraph. It seems like it should say all types of surveillance in the last sentence in there. Will also address some minor things there. Then
I'm sorry, can you repeat? The surveillance policy will address all.
will also address data management and storage.
I got that.
Okay. Also, okay.
Yeah. And then in number 1, I think we should eliminate the last sentence of number 1.
Page 1.
On the definition
Number 1.
of surveillance
Number 1.
technology?
Yeah, right. Yes.
Under the definition of surveillance
Right.
technology?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we should eliminate the last sentence of that.
Which?
Of number 1. It's on the second page, the last sentence of number 1.
The enumeration?
Yes.
Do you have this right? Mine is on this page 1. This is where I have number 1.
Right.
But then
The
it goes
last-
on.
it-
Look
Okay,
on the
so
letter.
I see.
The last
Yeah,
sentence
the
of
last
number
sentence of the
1.
Okay, I
paragraph.
see. Okay.
To eliminate, I recommend that we eliminate that sentence.
And what's your thinking behind that?
I don't think that this is the time that we're endorsing or not endorsing or approving. I can understand that kind of thing maybe being in a final definition of that, but it just, in terms of a definition here, it didn't seem like something that we needed.
For purposes of a cover letter to
Yes.
internally to our agencies.
Yes, yeah. So that's, I would recommend that. And then in 2, it refers to section 12E And I think that should say defined in one above.
Could you repeat that, please?
In number 2, it refers to section 12E, which obviously doesn't have anything to do with this.
With our document.
Yeah, so I think it should say as defined in one above.
So strike section 1, section 12E, and add paren 1 above.
Right,
Right.
And then the other thing is, again, just a really minor editorial thing. The last paragraph, thank you in advance for responding. I would say for responding to this survey, not for your efforts. It just seems superfluous to have those words in there.
Thank you. Could I actually follow up, Marcy, on your comment about the reference to the last question? So in the second to last paragraph of the letter, when you looked at that language, I think one thing we were hoping to learn from you is whether or not this is an appropriate way to deal with the issues of confidentiality and sensitive information.
Well, and I guess I don't know what the committee is looking to do. I mean, to me, this was just a letter. It didn't
Yeah.
provide any, legal guidelines or anything. I mean, it just said if you're not able to answer it, just note that. And then I assume the committee was going to make determinations with consulting with our office or the police department or whoever's involved of why it couldn't be released. Or, I mean,
Right.
there's so many different variables we'd have to look at for each item and why we couldn't or couldn't release it.
Right. Right. So that sounds like a decent way to start. Or is there something you might change about how handling that?
So what our intention was to ask the departments to flag, so not to identify the things, but to flag that there are some things.
Mm-hmm.
And then we could, as you said, follow up with your office and or in closed session somehow to dig further.
Yeah, I mean, I think they would understand that based on this. I mean, you're not asking them to say what it is
Right.
or anything, just.
Okay, thank you.
So Sherry, we're on item number 5 on our agenda and going through the cover letter and survey. We're on the cover letter, and Liddell had a few edits to make. How does the rest of the committee feel about those suggested edits? They seem fine to me. You good with them, Samba?
Yep.
Okay. Did you have any comments on the?
They're not substantive.
They're not,
Oh,
well,
okay.
one is a little bit, I mean, they're copy edits, but it's deleting the sentence so if you're on the second page, the last sentence of the first paragraph there.
Okay. Okay. Great.
Okay. And now moving on to the survey, if we're good with that letter? Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Some of the language on the front of the survey mimics the language at the end of our letter. And Heather, did you want to say anything first about the survey?
So in developing this draft survey, I used the information from the 2004 survey, which actually was quite comprehensive and did a lot of translating from focusing on cameras to general surveillance technology and equipment. I added some elements that we've seen in other policies that where we had information we wanted to gather, and I also was keeping in mind the relevant ordinances we've been looking at. So, and the comments you've shared at the previous meeting. So it's sort of a amalgam of what we've discussed.
And Marcy, you did have some comments on the survey?
Do you want me to
Okay,
go
yeah.
through this?
Yeah.
Well, the first one was just at the beginning of the survey where it says, please refer to the definition of surveillance technology in the cover letter. And then it says, answer yes or no. And then no, it says skip to question 21. It didn't really make sense. 21 didn't
Yeah.
connect.
Yeah,
To
it seemed
me-
like it should have been to question 20.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which one it would go to. And then also, I didn't see where you ask about the confidentiality, and maybe I missed that. You know how in your letter. Okay.
That was neglected, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And then unfortunately, I haven't been involved in the conversations that have happened at this committee, so I don't know if people have talked about the number 6, where you talk about the technology deployed throughout the city. I guess that addresses the security issue, but throughout here, you're asking departments to tell you where their technology is, and I don't know how general you're expecting people to be or how specific. And I didn't know if someplace you rather say, do you have them in your parking lot? Check. Do you have them in your lobby? Check. Versus expecting departments to say, I have one at the West Police District in the parking lot. I have one at East in the, you know what I mean? I don't know how
Yeah.
specific you're looking and what your timeline is and how quickly staff can get how much you want. And so I guess that's one of the general at the beginning. I don't know how much specifics you're expecting or think staff can get done. And I don't know what staff has, if certain staff have a general list. I was at fire yesterday when I was reviewing this, and I said to one of the assistant chiefs, do you know where all your cameras are? And he said, well, yes, but it would take some digging to figure out exactly where they're positioned, what it's hitting. You know, we can tell you they're at administration and they're at the stations, but where exactly they are, they would have to go out and look, just as an example. And I don't know about police and other, you know, Metro and other places, water utilities. So I don't know if you want to address in here somewhere, like how specific you want departments to get, or how general, if you can come up
Yeah.
with a checklist, or that was just one general
Okay.
overview.
So your first thing, when you said question or before question 1, if you say no, skip to 21, what is wrong with that?
Well, 21 doesn't make sense.
20 makes sense, but 21
Okay.
doesn't make
Oh,
sense.
so
Yeah.
okay, I see.
Sorry. And then on 17, where you ask, are residents aware that this surveillance technology? I don't know how agencies would know if residents are aware. You know, I don't know of any agency. I mean, they're supposed to file their documents with the city clerk, so one could say, well, yes, because we filed the documents with the city clerk, but I don't know if how they were expected or are expected to notify residents. And so I just felt like those questions under 17, and then if answered no, please explain why they weren't informed. It makes it seem like there's a duty to inform residents, and I think the duty is to file the document with the clerk's office. And then, I mean, I'm not aware of anything within any ordinances or APMs that say right now that staff have to do a press release or notify somehow other than through the clerk's office is the notification. So I don't know if there's something I'm missing with that or not.
I don't think there's an existing duty to do this. That may be of something that a policy standard to set in the future, but no. It was a question in the previous, in the 2004 survey about cameras.
Yeah, and I don't know what
So maybe there might be a better way to word that, like, do you inform resident, like,
'Cause to
do
me, it
you
made it seem like
inform?
they
So
were
it's about what
failing a
they do,
job.
not what residents are aware of.
And I was afraid staff would then say, oh my gosh, I failed
I know.
doing something.
Yeah.
Because I read it and I'm like, oh, are they
Yeah.
supposed to? Because it makes it seem like there was a duty. So those were just my comments I had on the survey.
Okay.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, and what I was just going to add is this is, you know, the first versions of this were 5 questions.
Right.
And now we're at 23-ish, potentially for each piece of technology, which is going to, I mean, it's going to be a burden for agencies to do. I mean, it's going to take time. So I
Especially
just,
yours in IT.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, so,
Yeah, and street, yeah.
Metro, and
Well,
so,
IT won't
Water
have that
utility.
much. As far as the technology that's there, ours is pretty much in a single platform, so.
But if
Well,
you're
that goes
asked
back to
identify
the-
where each one is, I think it depends
Oh.
on what's.
Well, yeah, I mean, to address that, I don't think we were thinking about asking the specific placement of each piece of equipment. I think we were thinking more generally. There was a discussion at our last meeting, we were talking about generally where is the equipment deployed throughout the city in terms of like neighborhoods and streets and, you know, maybe at the building level, but not specific camera level. We're not asking for
I
that.
took it that you were, so I
Yeah.
think, because it's, I mean, one of the questions is how many pieces of this type of technology does your agency own?
Yeah.
So like, you know, Chief Wall said, do you want one for, and maybe you need to make separate ones for the different types. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
how you're looking, but
I think that's a question I was coming up against in developing the survey. I do think we need to have a separate form filled out for each type of technology, because otherwise the questions get very complicated and circuitous. And so, yes, I think that, you know, if it's cameras versus, you know, license plate scanners, like we need to have information on license plate scanners and information on cameras for all of these questions, because they are deployed differently, the
Yeah.
data's managed differently, the owners are different in every case. So I understandably, this is much more robust, but that is what the work group seemed to indicate at the last meeting, that if there were probably double or triple the amount of questions were added at the last meeting.
I'm wondering, does
Okay.
IT have the capability of, you know, printing out a map with all the city-owned cameras on it? You know, stationary cameras?
I believe so.
Because, you know, that might be a way to go for cameras, and presumably you know who the owner is, although that's something I have marked on here. You know, how we're defining owned there. But if you know who the owner / manager is of the cameras,
Would a list be better? Because
Then you
the
could
map
c-
can be really, if we put the cameras on a map, you're just gonna see just a bunch of dots.
Mm.
So you'll have clusters. So you're not gonna really be able to tell where they are. So I would propose more of a list
uh-huh.
that gives you the location of the cameras and the owners.
I think that would be useful, and I think that would be something we would want. I think one of the questions, though, is how they are distributed throughout the city. If there is a location that has a higher density of cameras. Now, we know that downtown does, and we might possibly want a blow-up map of that or something. But I think that it might be helpful to see visually on a map where the cameras are located. That would, it seems to me, really ease the burden then on individual agencies if IT could provide.
But
could
didn't
provide that.
didn't we have a discussion that IT manages some cameras, but not all of the cameras that the city
So-
owns?
So IT doesn't own any of the cameras.
Mhm.
So IT manages, and supports the infrastructure for the cameras, such as the application, the web servers, and the storage, but we don't own the cameras, so we don't monitor the cameras. The agencies are the ones who actually own and monitor those cameras.
But are there any agencies that IT does not manage the cameras?
No.
Okay, so IT is managing all the
We
cameras.
just manage the infrastructure for the cameras.
Got
We
it.
don't manage the cameras and how they're used.
Got it, okay.
Except
I
for
think
maybe
for
some
our
of the
survey-
mobile cameras.
I'm sorry?
Except for some of the mobile cameras.
I believe Metro has cameras that they manage themselves. Oh, me? Sorry.
You just, yeah. I
You could have sent me an email.
Anyway, I think that would just
But that
really
would
ease
cover the-
the burden.
Lines here. Okay,
Yeah.
Sherry. you
I-
next.
Would that be for this survey? Because I thought this survey would be more of how many cameras do you own? I mean, or how many cameras are assigned to your department? So that we can get more versus the detail that you're talking about for this survey.
Are you thinking there's going to be an additional survey in the future after this one?
Well, I'm thinking that we're gonna want more details as we go into it further. But if not, then I just need clarification on that.
I would tend to agree, but let's let's, you know, discuss that more. I mean, if we can get that map and list from IT of cameras
Outside of this process.
outside of this process, then I'm thinking that this question.
But this question
Cameras
is,
aren't the only
Right.
I
technology,
do
though.
realize that cameras aren't the only item. What else would be location specific?
I don't have an answer to that question. I think that's what we're trying to determine.
Okay, okay.
I
Because-
mean, what we could do though is if IT could develop such a list or map in time for us to get this survey out, we could attach it and say, if your cameras are represented on this survey, you don't have to go into any more detail.
That's a good idea. Yeah,
And
that's
so you could
good.
address the camera question, but I would hesitate to, if the work group does want location information for other devices, then we should request that in this survey.
Now, there was some email going around regarding some media access to knowing the locations of some of these cameras, and some of the agencies did not provide that information because of Homeland Security concerns. So we'll need to kind of just understand that issue, and especially with putting this information out there for the public to see, we still need to have, at least from IT's point of view, approval from the owners of those cameras to provide that information. So I don't want IT to be the one that just arbitrarily gives it. I want someone else that's higher than IT or us to say it's okay to provide that information.
So are you saying that we send this survey and then after we get the results of the survey, then you provide your list? Is that based off of the response?
I don't know. I don't know exactly how it fits into that. The only concern I have is there was some reasons for not sharing the locations of the cameras.
So, and this question addresses that concern. So it says, no, if providing this information would jeopardize security, please indicate why you can't
Yeah.
disclose the location. So maybe if there's a way we can reword this whole
Yeah.
question to not put the burden, to ask departments to let you know.
I don't know exactly the best way to do it. Like I said, if there was just some way that I have assurance that, like, you know, the agency that didn't want to share the locations of cameras, that it's okay to provide the locations of those cameras, I'd like to have some kind of documentation that shows that.
So maybe we can ask a question in the survey that says we will be asking for the location of these cameras through the IT department. Are you okay with it? Or
And that's
to
fine, yeah. That would be
something to
fine.
that effect. If they say yes, then, you know, you are off the hook. If they say no and we still want it, then we have to figure a way
Correct.
out.
Yep.
Yeah.
And since we don't own the cameras, it's not us, it's not our
Right.
decision to say, yeah, we can give you the information even though we have it.
Did you get that, Heather?
Actually, if you could repeat that. that'd be
I'm
helpful.
just saying, as part of the questionnaire is to ask this department head that will be reaching out to the IT department and ask for the location of these cameras. Are they okay with it or not?
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, they can also ask us for like, let's say, let's say police says, yeah, it's okay to share, you know, or what you could do is probably put in there, if you need a list of the locations of your cameras, we can then respond to that and give that agency that list of the camera, and then they can give you the information. So that way, we're not giving you the information directly, which is another option as well. Which would be a lot easier, and then we
Yeah.
have,
Vic?
Well, as I think I mentioned at the last meeting, the way I'm thinking about this is I almost see the city enterprise cameras as here and
Right.
everything else over here.
Yeah.
And I personally think that it's much easier for IT to say, here's our list, ask the agency heads, any objection to us releasing this on a map, and then you guys get all of the city enterprise cameras from them.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot less chance of someone missing someone or
Yeah.
making a mistake, because I know when we had the open records request, we weren't even sure which ones do we own, because it's such a convoluted history of the funding and the budgets, that we own ones that we really don't have anything to do with. So I think if that stuff all comes from IT, endorsed by the agency head, and then everything else goes through the survey process, and that's clear to agencies when they get this letter. I think that would streamline things a lot easier than, because I don't know how many cameras are in that system. I mean, 700,
900.
900?
I think
So
872 was my last count.
instead of having every agency trying to
Yeah.
pick and choose off a list. And I think we just, and hopefully these guys can provide a good definition of when we say city enterprise cameras, what we're talking about, so everybody has a shared understanding and we don't include or exclude things inadvertently.
Yeah, a lot of those cameras also are, they'll have an owner, but they're shared with another agency. So another agency uses it for another aspect, and another agency uses it for like public safety and traffic monitoring, you know, for a different agency.
My understanding is agencies are eager not to own them because then expenses associated with them are charged to them, and they would just assume that they be owned by somebody else. And that's why, you know, in terms of this the question, the survey for each type of surveillance technology owned, it's right at the beginning. Please complete a survey for each type of surveillance technology, and it says owned by your agency. I'm wondering if we should say owned or managed by your agency. So, you know, the ownership question, it seems to me, can get a little weird.
Yeah, the way that I envision what ownership means is if the agency did the initial purchase, because I believe the agency makes the initial purchase, and then I believe that we pay the maintenance after that.
IT pays the maintenance?
I think so, but I'd have to follow up on that. But I know that we don't purchase the cameras out of our budget. They come out of the agency's budget. So when I hear own, if you buy something, like I bought this cup of coffee, I own this cup of coffee.
And I think if we own or manage, then we'll get duplicates.
Yeah.
Because they may own it, I may be part of those who manage it, and so you'll get a list from me and from them.
Okay, then let's footnote owned,
Yeah.
or initially purchased by the
Right.
agency or something.
Yeah, I think
That-
that'd be helpful.
Or say
Yeah.
purchased by your agency, instead of owned,
Okay,
purchased.
Right,
yeah,
right.
okay,
But
that's a
what
good.
about- But what about agency equipment that is an in-kind donation?
Purchased by or donated to.
Okay.
Yeah.
For the non-enterprise stuff.
Yeah.
And so when
Required.
when you say non-enterprise, give me some examples, please, of cameras, for example.
Well, it could be our in-car video cameras, the body cameras, our covert surveillance, you know, mobile cameras that we use for specific investigations.
Okay.
So those things aren't connected to the city network.
Okay.
They're not feeding into that server. The signal isn't. It's a different process, a different infrastructure for those
Okay,
things.
okay. And you wouldn't have those then in your, okay, that helps, thank you. Yeah.
But Herb, do you know which agency initially purchased each camera?
We know who owns the cameras, yeah.
Okay, all right.
So we have
So,
that information, so.
So I think proceeding along the lines.
Or donated to.
Mhm.
Now, there are some instances
Yeah.
where an agency purchased and procured the cameras initially, but they met with another agency, and the other agency took ownership of the cameras.
So
But,
what does that mean if you're doing all the maintenance?
so ownership and maintenance are completely different.
Right. So what is ownership in that?
So
Like, did
ownership
they
would be
do
like
a
s-
budget transfer to?
I don't know
own
the
them?
back end part of that. I can only speak to like who says that I'm an owner of this camera and now this agency is now an owner of that camera. That's all I can say. I don't know anything about the procurement or transfer of funds, but it's usually after the camera has already been initially procured. So when we're kind of saying that when you initially procure it, that's the owner. I'm just saying that that's not always true, and it's only in a small amount of those cameras where the ownership has transferred from one agency to another agency. But the ownership that we have listed, that agency is the owner of those cameras, meaning that they're the ones that use it, manage it, and monitor it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Sherry, were you saying
Well, I'm
something?
thinking it should be purchased by, or donated, or owned.
If we're having
Because
IT
of this
printed off,
transferred.
yeah, if we're having IT printed off, or are you talking about non-cameras in this case? Non-cameras, Sherry?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So Sherry, you're saying we should say purchased by, donated to, or owned by your agency?
Yeah, because that covers whether
Everything.
it's been transferred, the new owner.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the rest of the survey, I mean, goes into questions about use, authorized use, unauthorized use. And we want that to match up with who is currently using those devices. Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want other comments? about
Yeah,
the
yep.
questionnaire itself? And again, some minor editorial things. In the first sheet, second to the last paragraph, second to the last sentence, the questions have not been completely addressed, rather than be.
Not been, yeah.
And then the same change in the last paragraph. Just scratch your efforts to and just say thanks in advance for responding to. And then it made no sense to me in question 5 to have this, is the technology mobile or stationary? You've got that question as question number 8.
Okay, it's redundant. I'll remove that.
In 14, you say who has access to them. I'm thinking if you mean the data, maybe we should say who has access to the data rather than them. Or I'm not sure what that meant.
Yes.
Other than the
To access
persons
the data.
authorized to access the data,
Yes.
who has access to the data?
That,
Okay, then
or,
that's,
or I could just say who has access.
Who has access?
okay,
yeah.
that's good. That's good. Then, for question 5, you say, if you answered yes, please note all part of question 5, which is fine. But then when you go over to question 18, you have, if you answered yes, be a whole separate question. I think that 18, you should strike question 19, and the, if you answered yes, should be part of question 18.
Okay.
Same with 20.
So delete 19, is that what you're saying?
Well, you just delete the number 19 because
Oh.
the, if you answered yes, it's part of question 18.
Okay.
So
I mean-
just to have that consistent approach to how you're
You can
doing
say
it.
that also about 13 and 14 as
Yeah, you have to
sub-questions
go
of
through,
12.
and 20, and,
Yeah.
you know, so, anyway, and then you're gonna have to be careful, and, 22, I mean, it's throughout. But I
Well-
think the way you did it on question 5 makes the most sense.
Yes, I'm thinking that's the framework I'd like to use. I'd rather keep, if you were talking about 13 and 14, I'd actually rather keep those as distinct questions
Oh,
rather
right.
than have them be
But
sub-questions.
13 is not really a standalone question.
No, I know it's not, but I'd
Yeah.
rather have it be numbered simply for clarity.
Okay.
And
Then-
so.
Then maybe, I'm sorry to be
No, that's
nitpicky.
okay. Go
Then
ahead.
maybe restate question 12 and question 13. For what reasons do the authorized positions have access to the data? Just so it's not,
Right.
so when you're looking, you're like,
Yeah, I agree.
for what reason is a meaningless question alone?
Okay.
So just add the context in there.
And then obviously you're gonna have to change at the beginning where it says no, skip to whatever the question ends up being.
And was your intention to skip to the question about having access to equipment owned by other?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So that's the reference point.
Or actually, I think my intent may have been to actually reach to question what is currently question 18. Does your agency have plans to purchase any additional surveillance technology? That says for the same or similar
Yeah.
purposes. But I think in the original survey, the 2004 survey, it had a standalone question about whether or not your
You have plans.
your agency would be planning to purchase anything. So
Okay.
we may want to have that as a separate question for everybody. Do you have thoughts on that?
No, that's good. And have that question number 1 point to that question, whatever it ends
Yeah.
up being numbered by. Just have to reword it a little bit.
Yeah. Okay. That's good.
Vic, do you have any comments?
Well, I think, other than providing agencies with,
The maps or the lists?
well, the maps, but I mean, time as well to gather this stuff, because I know you guys had contemplated a pretty aggressive timeline originally, but I think this is gonna be a few months probably that agencies will need to do this, once this goes out. So I think if you want it to be comprehensive and accurate, I think it's gonna take some time.
2 month, could you say a number? 2, 3?
I mean, I think between 60 and 90 days is probably
Yeah,
reasonable.
okay. Go ahead, Liddell.
So maybe I'm just totally not aware of all the surveillance kinds of things. I had in my head that, I mean, cameras would be the biggest issue, and that we certainly have some of these other things, but that really, that we wouldn't have, or that we don't have, you know, like surveillance-enabled or capable light bulbs or I mean, so are you saying that we've really got massive amounts of this stuff, and that's why it would take so long?
Well, I think it's two things. I think one is there's a fair amount of specificity that's asked for in the survey. Exact numbers, a lot of details, so even for the things that everybody knows about, like in-car video, it's just gonna take time to plot out those answers. And I also think that the definition is pretty broad, and to me, reading it, it's kind of convoluted, and I think once we get into this, I expect that we're gonna find things that it's gonna capture that probably nobody's contemplating.
Thinking of,
It will, and I think it's gonna take time for agencies to really look at that carefully and make sure that they're not omitting anything that definition is applying to. And I suspect there'll probably be some, or it may benefit to have some sort of process where agencies can sort of come to the committee and say, do you think, is this what you're intending, that this particular device or equipment or technology be
Would
part
be.
of this process? And I think it's going to take time for agencies to sort through that.
Is there anything in the definition that, you said it's convoluted, is there anything particular that you think is, you know, like challenging to understand, or that makes it convoluted, or that we should clarify?
Well, like one that just jumps out at me, which isn't necessarily any priority at all, is social media monitoring software. And so that can mean everything from some high-level stuff that the federal government uses that can cast a massive dragnet, to TweetDeck, which you can download on your iPad for free and sit and monitor a few Twitter feeds at the same time. And so is TweetDeck, which is free and anybody can get. Is that a social media monitoring software? Probably. Have we used that occasionally during special events to sort
Right,
of keep an
right.
eye on what's going on? Yeah. So is that something that we're going to have to do the 20-question survey response on?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I think there'll be others that are gonna be, if we're really doing a comprehensive deep dive on each of this, that there'll be others, I'm sure, that we're gonna think, well, does this, doesn't it?
Okay, thank you.
So,
That's helpful.
So what do we think about having a, a timely response to those kind of inquiries? Do we have to wait to meet for our meeting to discuss some of those? Could we have those questions forwarded to Heather? I mean, I think if we're deciding on it, we do have to make decisions jointly in a
Right.
meeting. But is there a way that that we can let agencies know that they can, send those issues to Heather questions as soon as they have them? They don't have to wait to finish the survey before they say, well, but we didn't know, but to really encourage them to get their questions
I think
to
that
us through
should be
Heather.
part of, on the survey cover, that they can send questions to Heather.
Well, that's what it says.
It says
in the
at
last
It's-
sentence.
at the end of it, but to really put a fine point on, especially the issue that Vic brought up about definitions
What's
of,
included.
if you're unclear about the kind of technology and equipment we're talking about, please don't wait to finish the survey to, to ask.
Right, I
Yeah.
think that can be included in that last sentence.
I think having them contact Heather will be helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that Vic raised a really good issue with that social media thing, and I would like us to talk about that a little bit and see if we really want that in there, or to better define what that is. The other things, I don't see, I mean, there could be questions about some of the other ones too. In looking at them, they seem to be clearer. But that social media monitoring software, that could, excuse me, I'm really wondering if we couldn't either define that better, or maybe we don't want that in there.
I think we want it in there because there are some, as Vic said, there are some specific products that aren't just on the general market that anyone can download that are used.
So
And we
is-
want to capture those.
So is there a way that we could define that?
I would suggest that if we're going to further define any of these provisions in the definition of surveillance technology, we could spend
Yeah.
the next 7 months doing it.
Okay, so when we get a call from the police department saying, what should we be including in this? What's the answer to that?
I think as Vic presented it, hopefully they would come to us and say, we use TweetDeck. Is that something you want included? And then we would make, I think the work group would make on a case-by-case basis a decision about whether or not to include it. I'm forgetting which city it was, but I think it's Seattle's ordinance explains that the city council, I think with support from the chief technology officer, decide as needed what is surveillance technology. Like, yes, they have a definition of surveillance technology,
Right,
but of
right.
course there are specific questions. So as needed, they regularly decide, like, is this something that fits in our category or not? And I think that might be something that's very appropriate for this work group to do as it goes through this process.
Okay.
I mean, if it turns out there's 10 to 30 different types of social media monitoring software, then we know we need a better definition and we
Yeah.
go further. But I think we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a point, good point.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But just to take the temperature of the group, like I would say, no, don't include TweetDeck.
Yeah, me too. I agree.
I mean,
wouldn't
I don't know, what do
include
you
that.
guys
Right,
think?
I would say that if
Yeah.
it's free on the open market, we all
Have access to.
access to it, so that wouldn't be one of the things that I
Yeah.
would be concerned with.
Yeah, and that would be getting more into their practices, not into the actual
Right.
purchase and equipment, you know, and the technology itself. But we're not here to go there, right?
Right, by our first question, TweetDeck would have been excluded because it's something you purchased, received through donation, or what's the other one?
Owned.
Oh.
Owned, right? So
Mhm.
TweetDeck is not something that would fall under any of those three categories.
All right, so what do we think about a date by which they should return it to us?
When is this going out?
I mean, we're finalizing it
Not
now.
on March 2nd. I'm
Yeah.
just joking.
Not on March 2nd.
I would say at least 60 days from whatever date we're sending it out.
So today is the 9th. You'll work on,
I could incorporate these
edits.
edits. I think it might be nice to check in with the mayor's office on this and have the mayor's office distribute this to agencies.
have we invited Gloria or anyone from the mayor's
We
office?
have not yet been working with the mayor's
Okay.
office on this. So I can connect with them and explain what we're up to, and then it might make sense to have a conversation with the mayor and see if he could be the one to send this out, because it'll reach more people.
Well, it'll have a bigger effect.
Mm.
It'll reach the same people, but it'll have a bigger effect.
Right.
So should we set that up for next week? That meeting with the mayor?
Yes, maybe
You
we
and I?
can try and.
Oh, he's
squeeze
gone
in-
a lot of next week.
Or squeeze into leadership or something.
I think he just sent out his email about when he's here and when he's not.
It's a long list.
It's a long list,
Mm.
but doesn't include Wednesday.
I can follow
Absence
up
from
and
the
try to
city.
schedule something.
No, he'll be here Wednesday. It's, Wednesday's the only day he'll be here. Wednesday and Friday, he'll be here.
Okay, so
So
I'll.
let's bring it up at leadership?
Yeah, let's see if we can do that.
Okay. But then we would be looking at, then we're getting in, that's middle of March,
Mhm.
middle to end of May, getting it back.
Yeah.
So
Meanwhile, we're
Okay.
working on these other things.
So say
Okay.
after the
Yeah,
meeting
that's
with
fine.
the mayor, he's okay with it, then maybe the week of the 19th is when, or the 18th is when it will go out.
Likely.
Right. So then 60 days from there.
That's middle to end of May. The end of May.
Yeah, so around the May 28th. Yeah.
Okay. All right, anything else on the cover letter or survey? Nope. Okay. Moving on. Review of policies from other cities. Heather filled out these tables with headers of the kinds of policies they have for a number of cities, including two, are there? We have 4 cities here, right, because we had multiple versions of the Nashville and the Seattle.
Yes, I can explain a little
Yeah.
bit about those.
Yeah.
So what I did, you had actually asked for a comparison on one chart of all of the different elements of all of the different cities we discussed in their surveillance ordinances, which proved a bit unwieldy. So rather than that, I took major elements with very few exceptions from each ordinance and broke them out into larger categories and made a chart for each city or county. So Seattle's is actually a 3-page document. You'll see there's Seattle and then has 2 more pages on that. And that is by far the most robust ordinance because it requires a great deal of reporting and auditing and community engagement. But there are, with those exceptions, there are strong similarities between all four communities and their ordinances. I don't know if you want me to really walk through the whole set right now, but in at least 3 cases, there are clear definitions for when approval is required. In many cases, it's seeking funds, acquiring new technology, using the technology, or entering into agreements with other communities. And then in every case, each community requires a surveillance use policy from every department. There are law enforcement exceptions that are varied, but they are present in every ordinance. Most of these, I think 3 out of the 4, have enforcement provisions. In one case, I think in Seattle's case, defying the ordinance is a misdemeanor. There are specific types of equipment that have specific rules. For example, Nashville has specific rules about license plate scanners. Basically, they don't allow license plate scanners except if they're part of a vehicle emission sensor program, and that is the only case. And then they have strict rules about the deletion of that data in particular. So those are some of the highlights, and we can spend a bit more time on that if you like, but what I did was I then took all of those themes and put it into a policy outline, which you also have before you today. So we can go in any direction you like from there.
So I've got a question. So I really appreciate this work, first of all, thank you, and particularly the outline. In regard to what you pulled out of each of the cities, so you just pulled out, there's no consistency between them in terms of headings?
There is some consistency between some of them when it's possible on the headings, yes.
Okay, but for example, then Somerville, it's all the mayor kind of things in the law enforcement exemption. But those things other than the law enforcement exemption are not necessarily mirrored in any of the other policies.
Yes. Yes, there are some mirrors. Somerville frames its ordinance differently. It starts basically talking about mayoral approval, and then it has 12 types of details that must be included in any proposal to acquire or use surveillance technology. The other 2 smaller cities or counties, Santa Clara and Nashville, Davidson, do not provide that kind of detail about what's required in that initial proposal. It's not as detailed. Seattle is very detailed. But what's repeated is the cases between Santa Clara and Nashville, Davidson, the cases in which you would need approval are repeated. And then what is also repeated is the weighing the costs and benefits. That's a theme that is in almost every ordinance. But it was impossible because the difference is it's a little difficult to, I think, compare them in the way that you intend.
Yes, right. Okay.
But the themes are here, and they are reflected in the headings and in the repetitive language.
And
so could I just follow up? And so one of the things that I saw in a couple of them, and I don't remember which ones they were, was how to address existing technology or compliance or review or approval. Is that in your outline? Did you include that in your outline?
That is not a specific item in my outline. However, the outline includes an annual reporting process for all equipment for all departments. So you could do it either way. You could set conditions for existing use, or you could establish that as soon as this ordinance goes into force, any existing materials have to have a report, a use policy, a data management policy, and be subject to audit and do annual reporting. So that's one way of getting at what you're saying, which is in the policy outline.
Okay. Thank you, Heather.
Sherry? I was just going to say that the theme with all of these is there is a process for approval.
Yes.
And a process for reporting, even though they're
Yes.
different.
Yes.
And I saw that same thing in what you just outlined.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because that's what's missing in our current policy is right now there are standards for setting your own policy, which is good, and a requirement to submit your policy on surveillance cameras. But there is no approval process in our system at this point in time, and no opportunity to reject or amend the policy.
Or reporting process.
And there is no reporting process. And there's no enforcement process either. That's also missing here.
Go ahead. And so, the use policy, does that include, because they do have enforcement in these other ones, so does that address enforcement? Because you've got enforcement exemptions, but.
Which document are you looking at?
The outline?
Oh, okay. So which line?
It's not, I don't find it.
Any enforcement mechanism in the policy.
Yeah, you don't,
Oh.
I don't
In the-
see that it has
Okay.
a line for
We should add
enforcement.
that.
Do you have an extra copy of that?
I mean,
You don't
that's
have
in the
this?
last part of your packet. That's the last page of your packet. Oh.
In the middle, there maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
No. Thanks.
Can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I haven't reviewed this. What are you talking about when you're talking about enforcement? And you talked about a misdemeanor. So are you looking at issuing a municipal ordinance citation to a department head if they're non-compliant? I guess I don't know what, because we've
No.
never.
I think though, in the policies we're looking at, it has to do with unauthorized access and
Oh, okay.
unauthorized use.
Okay, all
Yeah.
right, thank you. 'Cause I was
Yeah.
So for example,
concerned we're going down
Yeah,
a
no,
path
no,
we
no.
have never done before.
No.
yeah, we haven't done it, but Santa Clara, for example, has a statement in its ordinance that says violations resulting from arbitrary or capricious action or conduct by the county or an officer thereof may pursue relief from a court, and they may collect county reasonable attorney's fees, and that the intentional misuse of county-owned surveillance technology is a misdemeanor.
Well, I think that's different than intentional misuse versus someone who's non-compliant with an ordinance. I mean, I guess there's two versions. The first part you mentioned, I think we'd have some serious concerns with if you're looking at going after a division or department head for, that's more of a personnel issue than you're not going to.
That's not the way most
Okay.
of these are, so I
Okay,
don't
that's
think
it.
that.
I mean,
yeah.
obviously, if someone is misusing, then that's a separate
Yeah, I mean,
offense.
it's,
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
And I actually, to go back to an earlier point, I think there's, as you said, there's multiple elements of enforcement. I think that the way that I have reflected it in the outline here is actually in the annual reporting process. So the council has, so item number 3 says council approval required, and there's many details. And if you go down all to like the little 7, annual reporting process, which requires, and this is up for your consideration, Seattle requires surveillance equipment report, surveillance use policy, data management policy, and an audit. So in my perspective, the enforcement of the policy is actually through the audit process and through the annual reporting.
It's not really enforcement, though. That's more accountability.
Yeah, really.
That's,
True,
I mean,
true.
that's like accountability. That's not enforcement.
True.
Which is, I think, what we want to get at, right?
Would you like, where would you like to put something like that in an outline like this?
No, I mean, I think you have it there. It's there. It's just, I was just talking about the word enforcement maybe isn't the best word to use when we're talking about accountability measures.
Okay.
Because I think what's important is accountability, not like enforcement, which connotes punishment
I
of
see.
some sort,
I
right?
see, yes.
Does that kind of get to some of your concerns?
Yeah, I was just concerned you'd be
yeah.
contacting MPD to write
Yeah,
citations
no,
to
no, no.
department heads.
No,
I was
no,
like, getting
no.
a little
Yeah.
worried about what we were going to do.
It's your job to think like
Yeah.
that.
You're going to say, don't come to any more meetings.
I'm unclear about why it's law enforcement exemptions.
Because,
Because it seems like some of the other ones, there might be other kinds of exemptions too. I mean, I saw things on emergency situation, you know, whatever. I'm just wondering if it's only law enforcement.
it doesn't have to be, but I think that that was a large theme that was carrying through. We could have a section on exemptions and have a subsection on law enforcement exceptions and have other exemptions as
I
well.
just wondered if that, because it seemed like there were some other ones that I had seen in here.
I mean, Seattle has exemptions for, you know, an immediate threat to persons that would cause bodily harm or death. And it has exemptions for, this one was interesting. I don't know if you saw this one, Herb, but it has, the Seattle ordinance has exemptions for, related to protecting the city environment, which I couldn't tell if it meant the technical, like, software environment or the physical environment of the city. Let's see if I can find that section. It's kind of interesting.
It's probably related to protecting the data
Yeah, that,
and in some cases access.
right, because it says, so this is on, if folks have the Seattle ordinance in front of them, this is on page 10, almost the last paragraph. City department may apply a technical patch or upgrade that's necessary to mitigate threats to the city's environment, even if the patch. And I do have those exemptions listed in Seattle's description, but because I didn't see that in multiple places, I didn't include in policy outline. We can if you want to. But I tried to focus on the themes were repeated as frequently as possible, sort of draw out the.
I think if we just
Highlight
have a
it.
heading of exemptions, we can, when we get to into the meat of it, we can discuss
We
that.
can have subheadings underneath it.
Mhm.
So when you said accountability, was that under 4B?
Under 3E7.
Okay.
Do we see any other gaps or things we wouldn't want to discuss about being in a Madison policy in this outline? I mean, I think it's a great starting point, and we can take away or add as
Yeah.
we get into the meat of our discussions. Any thoughts? Vic, Herb? No?
Well, I think, I mean, the devil's really in the details
Yeah.
in terms of how these things play out a little bit. The one thing that you sort of touched on in some of the prior meetings is some sort of mechanism for a closed session or a more limited disclosure or notification process, either with the mayor or council leadership or something like that. And I don't know where that would fit in here or how that might look, but that might be something else to keep in the mix.
Okay. How to handle sensitive information.
Yeah.
Anyone else have anything else to say about this?
Well, I guess I have a question. So going forward, if we use the amended version of this as a framework, how would you like to move through it? How would you like to do the work? What's your vision?
Then let's move on to next steps
Oh,
and
okay.
talk about, does it make sense to talk about that within the next steps?
Yeah.
So for our next meeting, we're going to be having a presentation, right, from Herb?
That is correct.
It won't be a super long presentation, so. just
But we
to
might have a
leave
lot
it
of
up.
questions and say, could you do, it
Yeah,
might
so-
take, your part might not be super long, but we might have a lot of interactive questions. Yeah. So what's sort of the outline of what you'll be sharing with us?
Basically, it'll be going over the surveillance capabilities that the city has.
Mhm.
So I'll show you some examples of some of the information that we're able to capture. Also maybe show some reports, stuff like that. So nothing too technical or anything like that.
So will you pull up the enterprise system on the screen so we can see it and you can
Probably not, but I'll be sharing screenshots.
screenshots?
Mhm.
Okay.
Why not pull it up?
Because some of that goes along with the discussion we had with not sharing out information of what we have as far as the technology specifics themselves. We kind of talked about doing that in a closed session.
But we all know we have those cameras.
This wouldn't be the cameras.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if you want to look at the cameras, yeah, this is more of the sensitive stuff for the
Gotcha.
internal monitoring of the city network.
Right. I think it would be helpful, I don't know, maybe everybody has seen the cameras and the capabilities and all of that, but I know that I found that enlightening in terms of how far some of them can see and how astoundingly good the resolution is. And so it seems to me that could be helpful, but maybe everybody's already seen that
For the cameras.
in the cameras.
Go ahead, Samba.
I was just gonna say, I think it will be helpful to this committee, whether or not we've seen it before. If we have to put good policies or put together a report, whatever that may be, to have a good understanding of what is out there.
Yeah, I know we did it for the cameras. I'm not concerned about the camera
Okay.
part.
Can you add that in your presentation then?
The cameras?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I may have to, so I don't use it, so I may have to have someone,
An authorized user.
someone that knows how to use the system.
Yeah.
I don't know how to use the system.
Vic.
And Vic, maybe Vic can do
Vic
it, yeah,
knows
Vic
how
can
to
help with the presentation, so.
Okay.
But what I'll show is basically, I'll show you, the systems and everything like that. But what we want to just be very careful with, exposing some of this knowledge to the public.
Right.
So I'll just, I'll probably redact some of the names and stuff like that, but you'll have a clear understanding of what it is that we're able to look at, what we're able to see. You can ask questions about how the data is managed, how access is managed and stuff like that. So you'll have a clear understanding of what we're capable of seeing. So it's not, it's not a lot. It's pretty basic, you know, so hopefully you'll get what you want out of the presentation.
Okay. So that's for next meeting and might not take up the whole meeting. What about addressing Heather's question about how we want to move forward with fleshing out this outline? Anyone have any ideas about where we should start? Should we take it section by section and
I
work
would
on one
like to take
section
it
each?
section by section. I think
Yeah.
that's more digestible.
Mm-hmm.
And if the presentation is not going to take up the whole meeting, which I was hoping it would, but I'm just teasing you. Then maybe we can take one section after the presentation and the questions.
But for this, aren't there already a lot of the processes in place, like seeking funds, you know, and stuff like that, that's already present or available?
Yeah, but we have to collate it and bring it into, I mean, it's work to actually, right, it's work that Heather's going to do that we have to think about to populate this outline.
Okay.
So it's there, but the work is to bring it into this context. Yeah.
Actually, maybe we should discuss that point because I think what would be new and different if say the policy as outlined and fleshed out would be adopted. We have previously discussed that there may be some equipment that the council doesn't even know about. So they certainly were not approving whether to acquire that technology. So this would be a new policy that would do that, which is not happening now in all cases, as far as I understand it. Unless, is that what kind of address what you're thinking?
No, I'm just saying that, you know, we already have, I don't know if policy or procedures, but we already have a way to seek funds, right? So you wouldn't really have to hash that out too much. You have a process for acquiring new technology and software.
But it's not about fleshing those out. It's about explaining that the council approval is required for all of those.
Oh,
And specifically in the realm of these kinds of things that, and if you read some of the other cities, how they do it, that might help,
okay.
you know, understand that.
Go ahead.
So I'm kind of envisioning back to Lork and Torque. And in those cases, Attorney Strange, you know, was really helpful in doing the drafting of the ordinance. Is that something you'll be working with like Marcy on, or how will that work?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm not an attorney, and the attorney's office is supposed to draft ordinances. So if you want this to be sort of an ordinance drafting process, we would have to, hi Paul, we would have to reach out to the attorney's office and request that. I think alternatively, you could have me working with you for a series of meetings to identify the key elements you want as policy elements, and then we could hand that to the attorney's office and have them draft an ordinance. Two different ways to go.
Yeah, with the Torque and Lork, there were already existing ordinances that were, I mean, the template was there and there were changes made. So I think that's why we started off with the city attorney's office, because there was already law. Existing law. And here there isn't.
Okay, thank you.
And what do you think about that, Marcy, about us doing some work, submitting it to you, and then you putting that into ordinance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best way to go. I can start trying to attend these meetings depending on their timing. I know I'm not in town on the 28th, but I can start attending just so I can understand where you're coming from, and it'll help my process, I think, to understand where you're coming from. I mean, you know.
Have you looked at or do you have copies of the?
I haven't looked at it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I assume
Yeah,
it's.
They're
to
on
make
Legistar.
sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I can, but I can start attending the meetings. if
Yeah,
that's
as
something you'd like.
you know, Alder Kimball said, they're in Legistar, so
Yeah,
you might want
yeah.
to take a look at those. Okay, thanks.
So to get even more specific, if you would like me to be drafting policy for discussion, I guess my strategy would be to, maybe come with the first few items with language or bullet points for the first few items, and then we could resolve each point. Is that what you're envisioning? I assume that's what John did. I wasn't there.
Yeah, he did.
Okay.
Is that what you were thinking, Sherry? Yeah.
Exactly.
Paul, we're just at the end of our meeting. Do you have a packet of info for him? It's gotten a little mixed up.
I apologize for getting here late.
Yeah.
I had a meeting from 11 till 1, and I'm the chair of that meeting, so,
So there's no getting out of that.
no, and it was our inaugural meeting of the year, so.
What,
Thank
we went over the draft cover letter and survey and made some changes, and Heather is going to write up final drafts of those documents, and then we'll be going to the council leadership meeting with the mayor next Wednesday and talking to him about that and asking him to send the letter out if he's in agreement with, everything. And then we talked a little bit about the other cities' policies, and now we are looking at this outline for, or we finished discussing that item, the policy outline for a potential policy that we would write.
That's this one?
Yep, yep. We added two sort of substantial things to that. One is we need a section on how to handle sensitive information that might need to be dealt with in closed session, and possibly adding more exemptions than for just law enforcement in other situations. So those were the two things we added to this. And now we're talking about how we want to proceed with fleshing this out. And I think you heard the discussion that just went on there.
I have a scheduling item which can wait till we're ready.
I think we're almost ready. So we've agreed that Marcy will come when she can, knowing that eventually we'll be asking her to draft ordinance language, but first we're going to be talking about just policy language and get our intent all together. And Heather will be supporting us to do that by providing some language for the first couple items. At the next meeting, at the next meeting, we'll first be getting a presentation from Herb about some of the surveillance capabilities for the first half of our meeting, and then we'll start digging into this work of.
And then the Legendary Wall is going to be doing a presentation, aren't you? With the cameras?
Oh, right.
Oh,
he's
you're
gonna-
supplementing.
He's gonna be the helper.
Supplementing.
Oh,
Show
well,
the
then I'll
cameras
take
over.
Legendary off. He's supplementing.
He'll be the Vanna White.
Well,
Okay.
in a previous meeting, Vice President Balde did say that he would like presentations from a variety of agencies.
Yes.
So,
Right.
given that it takes time to prepare such a presentation, and we're going at a fairly fast meeting schedule, our meeting after March 28th is April 9th. Do we want a presentation there, and which agency do we want to?
Metro. Is
Did you say
what
Metro?
I'd throw out, yeah.
Yeah, makes
Actually,
sense.
that's a great idea.
Makes sense.
Oh.
So I think we'll also want something from the police, maybe after that.
Okay.
That's actually
And water utility, maybe?
Yeah, what-
Do we want water
That's gonna
utility?
change.
What's the date of that again?
Our meeting,
April 9th.
our next meeting is March 28th, and then April 9th. And then I actually don't have the next I don't have my
Oh, I
calendar.
don't have
I'm
something
actually
down.
open
What
on-
time on April 9th?
At noon, I
Okay.
think. It's a Friday.
For
at noon.
whatever reason.
I'm going to put that, I don't have that
No,
on
it's
my
April
calendar.
13th.
Sorry.
April 13th.
Friday the 13th.
Oh, I've got that. Okay.
Oh, okay.
We
that's
need
on.
to get other ones scheduled then.
We have April 27th scheduled.
Oh, okay, good.
And do
Yeah,
we
I've
have
got
any
that.
in May?
Okay, very good.
We didn't go into May,
We didn't
but
go
we
into
should
May.
definitely confirm with Paul that all if we could go through the dates and confirm they work for everybody.
Paul, bye Sherry. Thank you for taking your time out of your workday.
I'll call you.
Okay. April 13th and April 27th at
No,
noon.
no, I thought March 28th.
Oh, but, sorry, March 28th, it's the next two, yeah. And April 13th, what about April 27th at noon?
Fat fingers. 27th, that's the 4th. I'm good.
Okay, good.
Do you want to set any dates beyond that, or is that enough for now?
Sherry just left.
That's true.
Let's do it on the 28th.
Okay.
Do our May dates. And we talked about, Paul, getting the surveys back by the end of May. So getting the surveys out now, so giving them about 2 months. Vic thought 60 days was okay for the request. And you're primed for the request anyway, so you've been thinking about it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And also
Okay.
that you're planning on running it through the mayor's office?
Right, I said we're going to council leadership next week. Yeah.
Do you want other members of this body there, or is it just you, or?
Well,
what's the
Samba's
deal?
always there. Heather's gonna go, and
I think it
I was
couldn't
gonna
hurt
go as
to
chair, but
have-
you're welcome to come, yeah.
Then,
Whoever can-
then it might need to be noticed.
Oh, yeah, darn it.
Yeah, so I'm thinking just 2 people should be there from the committee,
Is
and
that
I'm
the
happy
20
not to go.
That's the 21st or the 14th?
14th.
14th.
We have PSRC at 5 o'clock.
So it starts at 4:30, so if you have to leave, you can make it the first item of the agenda.
But we would have to notice it.
Here anyway, so.
We would have,
Oh,
we'll
if-
have to notice it.
Or the-
Public
So
notice,
if you
because
want to
we'll be a
go, they're going to
quorum.
have to notice it, and which is fine, but.
We'll be a
we
quorum.
just- If you aren't going to
Can
go,
you
then they
put me
don't.
down?
Yeah,
Okay.
Since I will be here for PSRC, then it's just logical, I can just go from one to the other, so.
okay. Well, we'll
Is the mayor going to be in
inform
town?
the mayor. Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one of 2 days next week he'll be in town.
Mhm.
Wednesday and Friday next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Need a motion?
Move adjournment.
Second,
We're adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
thank you.
I have a 2 o'clock, too.